Hey, you guys, welcome back to episode 2 of the Worship Leadership Online, whatever this is. Good to be with you. Today, I want to talk to you. First of all, I got to stop saying, I watched the videos that I did yesterday, and I said, like 1,000 times. So I am going to try to cut out the uhs. That is my commitment to you because I care. See, I don't know what to do if I can't say this feels like these awkward pauses, but we can get through this. Today, I want to talk to you about something that is very apropos to what's going on in our world right now, and that is leading worship in the midst of a crisis. There are sort of 3 different categories of crises that I want to talk about. The first one is when there is a worldwide global crisis, the kind of thing that is in the news that everyone is talking about. What does it mean to lead worship for your church in the midst of that? The second kind of crisis that we need to be prepared for as worship leaders is a crisis that is just affecting your church body. So it could be the loss of someone, or like if someone who is young and well known to your church passes away, that is something that the entire church feels. Or it could be the result of a conflict. There have been a couple times in my career where I have had to lead worship after a pastor has been fired or some such event where everyone is reeling and you've got to come in on Sunday morning and you've got to do your job. So what is that like? And then the third kind of worship leading in a crisis is leading worship for a funeral. And there are lots of issues and things that come up in leading worship for funerals that we need to be prepared for. So let's begin at the beginning. Let's talk about number one, the thing that is so prevalent right now that's on everyone's mind is this worldwide crisis, this pandemic that we are dealing with. What does it mean to be leading worship during a time like this? Well, during these sort of high stakes moments for us as a church, I am reminded of the great golfer, Jack Nicklaus. Now, stay with me here. I promise this is going somewhere. Jack Nicklaus was asked about why he did so well in the major tournaments. And Jack Nicklaus has won more of the major tournaments, the really big, important tournaments, than any other golfer. And he said that the major tournaments were actually easier to win because everyone else is so stressed out about the fact that it's a major tournament, that the stakes are so high, that they take themselves out of contention, and all he has to do is play golf, which is what he does all the time. And so it was easier for him to win those tournaments. That is the kind of mindset that we as worship leaders need to have when we're coming into a crisis. Everyone is stressed out. Everyone is concerned and preoccupied with whatever the crisis is. But the only thing that we need to do is focus on what we always do, which is just point people to Jesus. And I'm going to pause right here because there are people making a racket outside of my door, and I cannot abide such. Okay, here I am talking about leading worship in a crisis, and I can't handle a little bit of noise outside my door, but it is what it is. So where was I? Oh, yes. In these high stakes situations, when the pressure is on and everyone is stressed out, all we need to do as worship leaders is be faithful in doing what we normally do, which is point people to Jesus. So let's remember that in the times of crisis, people need more than anything for us just to do what we always do, which is to point them to Jesus. In a crisis is not a time where we need to be clever or particularly innovative. We need to be calm and steady and point people to Jesus. Now, a few things about when a crisis comes up. First of all, the plans that you had for Sunday, forget about them. If it's a big crisis like the pandemic, or I remember when I led worship the Sunday after 9/11 happened, we had plans. We were it was September, so we probably had this great kickoff sermon series that was going to be, uplifting and about getting people involved in church. That went out the window, and we needed to acknowledge and address the situation. And so we planned our service for that moment. Now, whenever there's a crisis or anything like this, there are going to be a number of different ways that people react. And as worship leaders, we need to be aware of all of those different ways. And so when you're planning your service in the midst of a crisis, do not do it alone. It is very important that you get a multitude of voices, people around that are mature and godly and have wisdom, and you can all come together from various different perspectives and come together with a plan that's going to meet the needs of your church. And often when people have different perspectives and different ways they're reacting to a crisis, just the fact that you're aware of those and you can acknowledge all of those just puts people at ease and is important for you to be able to do. You take, for example, the current crisis that we are in. Some people think, this is not such a big deal. We'll get through it, whatever. Other people are literally fearing for their lives. And so in this situation, being able to acknowledge and understand those are all the perspectives coming in, that's going to help you lead worship. Now, still, you're going to do what you always do. You're going to point people to Jesus. You're going to be faithful in that. You are going to model the right response in the crisis, which is for us to turn to our Heavenly Father for strength, to rely on Jesus and to work in His strength, not to panic, not to overreact, not to ignore these things, but to turn our eyes on Christ and to invite people to do that with us, to just be real about it, and to acknowledge all the different ways that people are reacting, and invite your church to come together in turning to Christ for hope and strength in the midst of this. So that is important. One of the tensions that you're going to feel in this situation is that there will be some people who think, you know what we need? We need to just have something that's normal. We can't dwell on this. We need to we can't wallow in the midst of our problems. That's one direction to go. Another direction is people, well, we need to deal with this, and we need to acknowledge this and talk about this, and we need to process this. That is a tension that you are going to have to manage between getting back to what's normal and to acknowledging the crisis. And that's why you need a multitude of voices to make that decision in terms of your programming for the service, because you can go too far either way, and it just takes wisdom. And Proverbs says that with many advisors there's wisdom, or something like that. You can look it up. So that's the worldwide crisis. Now, our current crisis is even more complicated because churches are going 100% online for the first time ever. So that adds there's a necessary element of change for most people who are going to this online experience, and the whole world is doing that. But the principle remains the same, that even through the online experience, we're just going to point people to Jesus. And remember that in times of crisis, those are real opportunities for us as the church, for us as worship leaders, to really minister people when they know that they need Jesus. So we should look at these times as opportunities and where we can rise to the occasion and do the easiest thing in the world. We just say, look, I don't have the answers, but Jesus does. Let's look to Him, and then model looking to Jesus for hope and strength in a time of crisis. So that's sort of number one, the global crisis, the kind of thing that's in the news. Let's move on to when your church is in crisis. It could be the result. Could be the result of a staff person being fired, or it could be a conflict in the church, or it could be a financial crisis, or the building burned down. Who knows what it could be, but this is a crisis that is particular to your church. Many of the principles are the same, but the other thing to remember is that, say for instance, a pastor has departed from the church and it's been somewhat acrimonious. So the entire church is reeling from this situation. You will still have people coming in the door who are brand new to the church, or who just started coming a couple of weeks ago, and they don't know anything about the situation, and they're still coming to your church. So that's something that you need to be aware of in your worship leading. The second thing you need to be aware of is that you will have people within your church that are on different sides of the conflict, if there is conflict involved. I actually preached the Sunday after the lead pastor was fired at one of my previous churches, and there were people who were furious that he had been let go. They loved him. And on the other side of the scale, there were people who were furious that he ever got hired in the first place, and were upset that it took this long to get rid of this guy. And so we, as a staff, the remaining staff, we walked into this situation where everyone was hurting, but for all sorts of different reasons. And again, don't focus on the crisis. It's not the time on Sunday morning. It's not the time when you're leading worship to try to resolve whatever the issue is. What your job is just to point people to Jesus. That's the main thing that you need to do. And if you faithfully do that, God will use you to bring comfort and hope and peace to your church. Okay, so that's number 2. That's the church crisis that you're leading worship in. Number 3 is the funeral. And there are, every funeral is unique. I have led worship at a number of funerals, and they're all unique. And sometimes the funeral is of a godly saint who loved the church, lived a very full life, and the family all love each other, and the family all loves Jesus. Those funerals are truly a celebration of life and of the hope that we as believers have, in that this life is not the end for us. However, there are funerals that are much more complicated than that. And so when you are leading worship in a funeral, these are the few things that you need to be aware of. Number 1, you can't really plan ahead for a funeral. In certain cases, if someone has a lingering illness and they know it's coming, then sometimes the family will come together and make arrangements well in advance. But typically, the person passes away, and then you have a few days to put together a funeral. So that's the first tension issue that you're dealing with, is there's a time crunch. Secondly, the family, the people who are working with you to plan the elements of this service, they're in crisis as well. Often they are in grieving, and so getting answers from them, asking them what songs do you want, how do you want the service to come together. Often they're just in a place where they're unable to give you those answers, and that can be frustrating when the funeral is a day away and you have no idea what the music is, or what the other elements, or what you need to put together for this service. So here's what I recommend. I recommend that you go in with suggestions for songs, hymns, and in terms of repertoire, go with the classics for a funeral. A funeral is not the time to teach a new song. I think you guys are smart enough to know that. But people will find comfort in what's familiar. And so by singing the great classic hymns of our faith, particularly a lot of funerals are older people. So those older classic hymns are going to bring great comfort to them. So just go with those. But back to sort of getting answers from the family. If you have a plan, if you have suggestions, you can go into a planning meeting and say, here's what I would suggest. Let's let's pencil this in, and you can let me know if you have ideas for something different. That is, I said again. I'm getting better though. That's a good way for you to manage that, because you just can't put the pressure on a family that's in crisis to come together and plan a service. It can be particularly frustrating because as a worship leader, you plan services every week for every year, but there's a family coming into this that they don't plan services. They don't know what's required. They don't know what decisions they need to make. They don't know what to do. So you need to guide them with pastoral sensitivity in planning that service. Another thing to be aware of is that often, all of our families have quirks and there are relationships that are strained. So in a time of crisis, all of those family conflicts and relationship strains, they are going to be exasperated during those times. And so you need to be aware of that and be especially sensitive to guiding through that. And hopefully your lead pastor is going to be able to lead you through that. I've had some, very unique experiences leading worship at a funeral. I had a lead pastor who told the grieving family, I said, again, whatever song you want sung at your funeral, Jeff can sing it. You just let me know and he'll sing it. And so the husband, and this was a younger woman who passed away from cancer, he wanted me to sing a song called Everything I Own by Bread.
You sheltered me from harm, kept me warm, kept me warm.
Yeah. Was not the greatest choice, but the senior pastor committed me, so I did it. I would not recommend that you overpromise when you're planning the funeral, but be that as it may, I survived. I will tell you that one of the toughest times that I've ever had leading worship was at the funeral of a young guy in his 40s, excuse me, who had cancer, passed away, left behind a young wife and a young family. And I was leading Blessed Be Your Name from the front of the church, overlooking his casket to the grieving widow and her 2 daughters. In that moment, I just had to sort of turn off my emotions and steel myself just to sing the song, just to be strong, because I wanted to be faithful, and they wanted that song to be sung. So I needed to do my job. The best way I could serve them was just to sort of become a robot and be strong and sing through that. That is a tough gig, especially because often your church, the person too, you might be sad as well and dealing with your own emotions and your own grief in this. But it's so important that we really do our best to serve the family, to be faithful. And again, we are pointing them to Jesus in this time of crisis. So those are sort of 3 crisis situations where you're going to lead worship. And I just have one final word about leading worship in a crisis. The fact is that every single Sunday at your church, there is someone who is going through their own crisis. So in fact, every Sunday, we are leading worship in the midst of a crisis. And it is so important that we just point people to Jesus and to remember that. And it's helpful. I need to be reminded that when I walk into the church, that maybe I'm having a great week, maybe I'm having fun, but there are going to be people there who that week they lost a job, or they got a bad diagnosis, or a relationship broke up. And we have an opportunity to point them to Jesus and to celebrate along with the people who are experiencing God's blessing in wonderful ways as well. That's the ministry that we have. And so God calls us to be faithful in that in every season. So thanks for checking in and watching this video. And I think I will leave you with a little bit of Everything I Own by Bread. Enjoy.
You sheltered me from harm, kept me warm, kept me warm. You gave my life to me, set me free, set me free. The finest years I ever knew were all the years I had with you. And I would give anything I own, give up my life, my heart, my home. I would give everything I own just to have you back again. You taught me how to love, what it's all. You never said too much, but still you showed the way. And I knew from watching you, nobody else could ever know the part of me that can't let go. And I would give anything I own, give up my life, my heart, my home. I would give everything I own just to have you back again. Is there someone you know, you're loving them so, but taking them all for granted? You may lose them one day, someone takes them away, and they don't hear the words you long to say. I would give anything I own, give up my life, my heart, my home. I would give everything I own just to have you back again, just to touch you once again.